Hey, what's up, Spartan Nation? Welcome to another episode of the Spartan Nation Podcast. Here with myself, Matt Lonsberry, and my co-worker, Ada McCrone, part of the Fan Nation network of Sports Illustrated. We'll give a few seconds here for some people to jump in. But yeah, today we're gonna kind of give our reactions to what we saw on Saturday at Michigan State's spring game / open practice. A lot to talk about the quarterbacks, obviously, but we also want to get into some other standouts and some transfer portal news that occurred that day and in the days following. And then if we have time, we'll get into some basketball stuff too. But let's go ahead and jump into just our reactions to the open practice. It was nice to be in the press box with you, Aiden, and just kind of bouncing ideas off each other, what we saw. So who stood out to you from the practice that we got to see?
Yeah, so I wrote an article earlier this week about kind of three standout players. For me, at least, I was a little more focused on the offense because the offense was kind of on our side of the field where we were in the box. So really, three guys that stood out to me. I said Jaron Mangum, Noah Kim, and guard Gino Vandemark. Jaron Mangum, running back transfer from USF, came in, brother Jaden Mangum. He, wasn't really talked about. He did have a 15 touchdown season 2 years ago or 2 seasons ago, which, that's really good. Um, so yeah, that kind of went a little under the radar, but he really showed in that practice what he could bring to the team and kind of how unique he is. And he really has power that no other running back has on this team. And then Noah Kim, we're gonna talk about the quarterback battle a little bit later,
Sure.
but he just he did stand out in those 2 minute drills and just kind of throughout practice. You know, all the quarterbacks, uh, Hauser talked about he did reps with the first team for I think it was inside run period, and then Kim split with him and for like the 2 minute drill, and then Thorne was obviously thrown in there for everything too. But yeah, he really made some good throws. Obviously, all of them had throws that they could improve on as well. But I think the throws that stood out that were really on the highlights of that practice were all from him. And then Gino Vandemark, he's replacing Brian Green for starting guard, and that's kind of that's a big deal with that offensive line.
Right.
Really kind of you really want to establish the run game again after last year was not as good. So, kind of complementing that Jaron Mangum, but also complementing uh Gino Vandemark and that line as a whole kind of, that running back room got better, but also that offensive line. And Gino Vandemark is his third season in this program. So, there's an expectation for him that, he already knows, and, he's healthy now. He battled a little bit of injuries last season. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at for that. I didn't really say anything for defense, but I did want to say one name for defense that did stand out to me was Ken Talley, the
Okay.
transfer from Penn State, defensive end. I thought he did well in a lot of the one-on-ones with the offensive line, and he was in there. He was really just physical, and that's really all you can ask for right now in the spring, and until you get to get in game situations, you can see what he's really made of. But yeah, I think he stood out in the one-on-one reps, along with that run game. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, and those are four guys that really stood out to me on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. Like, and we talked about this in the press box, but just the physicality that Jaron Mangum runs with, and you look at him and he's a big back. Like he looks like, try to think of a guy to compare him to, like not a Derrick Henry, but like Derrick Henry's kind of a
Yeah.
freak, but like that kind of like big back though, who looks like he can run through tackles and get you
Hmm.
tough yards. Um,
I mean, for
and
MSU fans, you can compare him to Le'Veon. I mean,
there you go.
I don't know. He's obviously that's high expectations, but there
Sure.
is like a similar body build and kind of prototype there.
Right. And I will say about Jaron Mangum, Michigan State really needs a third and short, second and short down back to get a tough yard. Like they had so many issues last year of just coming up with a yard or two when they really needed one of those short yard situations. And even going back to 2 years ago, and this is probably has more to do with maybe the offensive line, but even I remember on multiple occasions, like Ken Walker getting stuffed on those short yardage plays. So some of it might be play design, some of it's the blocking scheme or offensive line play, but just having that big strong back to convert those third or second and shorts or maybe even fourth down too is kind of a overlooked but vital piece of the puzzle for Michigan State maybe this year. And I think maybe he's that guy who can be that for them. I agree with you on Kim. I think he had arguably the most like or the biggest like wow throws of the day, like that really jumped out. Um, and then a couple throws that he probably would have liked to have back too. And like you said, we'll get into the quarterbacks a little bit later. Um, and I no like specific offensive lineman jumped out to me, but just the sheer numbers. Like I know we've heard about it, with Jay Johnson and Mel Tucker and Chris Kapovich talking about the numbers that they had. But when you actually see it, being there last year and seeing a couple of defensive linemen walk-ons helping out and just so few bodies, and then just seeing the difference this year, it definitely was striking. Um, and obviously, you need the five guys or top seven guys who are going to rotate. You need them to be better than the top five last year. But also, I mean, that amount of depth can only be a positive. Um, and hopefully that comes to fruition for them this year. But even if it doesn't, like you can see that there is a lot of building going on with that position group. And, even going back to the end of the D'Antonio era, Michigan State had some problems up front with depth and things like that. So this might be the start of building up that position group and getting it to a level where you can start competing for Big Ten championships again. I know that's a kind of a long way off based on what we saw last year, but like it starts in the trenches, and what they had there stood out. And then another guy I'll throw out there that you didn't mention was just Jordan Hall, and I know you and I talked about him quite a bit, but the dude just looks like a third-year guy, not a freshman. It's kind of crazy when you see how big he is,
Mhm.
how defined he is. He looks like he's been in the strength and conditioning program for 2-3 years already, and he looks like a guy that the coaching staff's going to have a hard time keeping off the field, and that's a excellent thing to have. As deep as they are at linebacker, and they are. Um, you got to get like Mel talks about this. You got to get your best 11 on the field, and he looks like a guy who is going to be in that best 15 to 20 range at least. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with him moving forward. I'm assuming he'll probably start out with some specialist team stuff. Maybe you bring him in for situationally because he does have good sideline to sideline speed. So, but yeah, definitely a guy that we're excited to see on the field. And I mean, I don't know. I'll just throw this question to you. Of the last three, I guess, recruiting classes, I think Mel's had three, I believe.
Mm, yeah.
Um, in my opinion, I think Jordan Hall might be the most like instant ready guy. Maybe that's not even a hot take. I don't know. Did anybody else jump out?
No, I don't. I don't think it is. I mean, you think of the guys who came in immediately, like Charles Brantley came in and
Yeah.
he played pretty much immediately. Even Keon Coleman really didn't play much until the end of
No.
the his freshman year. I'm trying to think of guys last year who really like came in immediately and didn't really play out of necessity because you think you're like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of D line kind
Right.
of guys who played last year, but they were playing out of necessity
Like Zion
with
Young.
injuries.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, yeah, Jordan Hall just I think a lot the players like him. Cal Halliday said multiple times in the press conference, he's very mature for his age.
Right.
Um, and just like everything about him. And then, just looking at him, you're like, yeah, this dude looks like a junior. Like he looks like he might go pro next year. And he's only a freshman. So that's definitely something exciting. Um, there is a question here of does Darius Snow have a time frame for returning to practice? He did dress for the spring game, but he didn't participate in any of the drills or anything. He kind of just dressed up. Um, I do not know if there's a time frame, but he should be back ready for this season. He should be healthy by the time the season starts. I don't know how they're gonna kind of ease him into practice and
Right.
drills and everything, but like that. But yeah, that's kind of all I know. I don't know. Do you know anything more about that?
No, I don't have too many specifics. Obviously, Michigan State and Mel Tucker, they kind of keep injury stuff close to the vest, which I totally understand. Like, you don't want to tell
Hmm.
your opponents or whatnot, like, oh, yeah, this guy's got a bum knee. So, like, you're not going to
Right.
do that. But um, I was a little surprised. And this is just based on my lack of insider knowledge about it. But I was a little surprised that he still had the big brace on the leg or on the knee, because it has been, let's see, it's September. So it's been 7, 8 months since his
Hmm.
injury. So that was a little bit surprising. Um,
Hmm.
but again, that just goes back to not knowing the ins and outs of his rehab and things like that, and recovery time. And you're right, like he's gonna go through summer conditioning, and then but it kind of looks like maybe his first contact drills are going to come in fall camp. I can't imagine he was doing a whole lot of contact stuff this spring, given the way he looked on Saturday. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, how quickly does he kind of get back into the swing of things? There's the mental hurdle as on top of the physical hurdle too. So definitely something to keep an eye on, and definitely a guy who, for Michigan State's sake, would like to get him back on the field, especially in like passing downs, because he's one of their better coverage options at linebacker. Um, so yeah, we'll just have to kind of take a wait and see approach with him. Um, I will say, just to kind of put a cap on the standouts from the spring game. Um, I think the two hits, like from the when they had live contact, the two hits that kind of I still remember are kind of stuck out. One came from Jordan Hall,
Hmm.
which was kind of like, yep, this kid, he's kid can make an impact this year. The other one was Cal Halliday, just lit somebody up pretty good, blew up a run play, I think,
Hmm.
and made good contact in the backfield. Cal Halliday's kind of a known commodity at this point, but just a dude who's solid. I just really like his game. He is limited in pass coverage a little bit. And I think he got exposed a little bit in space at times last year and maybe even the previous year. But as far as like a run stuffing linebacker, um, that's a pretty good option for Michigan State. A guy who looks like an All Big Ten type. I don't know. Can't remember if he was All Big Ten last year or not. It seems like he mm, may have been, maybe honorable mention or something like that. I don't remember,
Yeah.
but uh, just a guy I really like. And obviously with Michigan State, the defensive woes over the last several seasons, you need guys to step up and one other one, Tunmai's Adelaide, or is it Tunmis or Tamize. I'm not
Yeah,
sure,
I
to be
don't.
honest. It's a
I
tough
can't
one
remember.
to pronounce.
Yeah.
But he made a play where Davion Prim kind of got it and tried to bounce outside on like an off tackle run, and Tunmise beat him to the sideline, took him down for a loss behind for my line of scrimmage. I think it was like on a third down, simulated third down or something like that. So just that kind of burst to catch up to a running back kind of
Mhm.
showed that athleticism that we've heard about over the last couple of months. So he's another guy who kind of jumped out a little bit defensively. So yeah, I mean overall, I'll say this about the spring game. I was a little disappointed when I found out it wasn't going to be an actual game. It was just going to be an open practice. But then you kind of look at some of the guys who were missing, and it kind of quickly made sense. I made a list here on the roster. Charles Brantley, Keon Coleman, Chris Bogle, Quavian Carter, Jarrett Jackson, Kerry Crump obviously is still suspended. Sebastian Brown, uh, Dylan Tatum. Like so, there's quite a few names here. Obviously, Darius wasn't available. Um, So kind of when you kind of look at those names, it kind of makes sense that they didn't want to split the squad up, and depth is kind of limited anyway on this
Mhm.
roster. We'll see what they can do in the months to come if they do anything else. I like there's certain pieces of the roster that I really like. We've talked about the defensive line, the linebacker uh, core. I think is pretty deep and loaded. Um, who else? Wide receiver, I think they'll be fine. Like Keon is like yes, Keon. Trey Mosley's a good
Mhm.
option. They just need somebody who kind of merges that number three guy. But I think they have a variety of options there. And Nathan Carter and Jaron Mangum in the backfield joining Jalen Berger. I think you've got some good options there too. The question marks are kind of what they've been is it's offensive line and the secondary, and that will kind of determine where Michigan State's ceiling is probably those two position groups. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I guess we'll kind of put a cap on just our instant reaction there, and we'll get into this quarterback debate that seems to be what anybody wants to talk about is that. So,
Right.
we'll get into the quarterbacks a little bit. I guess Aiden, just give me your first baseline impressions on what you saw from Peyton Thorne. We talked about Noah Kim a little bit, so maybe focus more on Peyton Thorne and Caden Hauser.
Yeah. So I mean, um, yeah. So Thorne really, I don't think it didn't seem like he was getting as many reps as Hauser or Kim, but he still did. Um, he still got some. That kind of immediately in my mind thinks, he's still the number one guy. In my head, just by like that observation alone. Um, But, he did talk about in the press conference that he did was battling injuries all of last season,
Yeah,
and that was something that, you know, I guess it was a bit surprising, but, you look at his performance from 2021 and how, he seemed to be playing well all the way up to the Washington game, and then, it kinda took a drop off there, so you're
yeah,
like, "Okay, I guess that does make a little bit of sense." Um, and then, yeah, as for Hauser, obviously, we don't know what happened in the other, what is it, 15 or 20 practices that happened before the spring game.
sure.
So, but you assume that the practices, behind closed doors are a similar format. So, having these different, game situations, obviously they did scrimmage behind closed doors. So you'd like to think that he had better days, and I believe that he did.
Yeah,
If he didn't, I don't think there would be a conversation at all about whether or not he would be, in the starting quarterback conversation, let alone, backup.
right.
But the way Kim performed in front of everyone kind of just brings you to that kind of conclusion that, everyone kind of concluded like, okay, Kim is still the number two guy right now.
Right.
But obviously, again, like we don't know what happened behind closed doors during every single practice, and we still have all of summer and fall camp to for Jay Johnson to evaluate and for us to, observe and, hear what the rumblings of what's going on. Um, but yeah, I think the way that Kim performed though in front of fans, albeit it was only like 15,000 or 20,000 probably.
Sure.
Um, but that does seem that he did talk about in the press conference. He likes pressure. He likes having, kind of the lights on. Um, and that's when he likes to be at his best. So I guess that does put, regardless of whether it is Kim or Hauser, that does put pressure on Thorne. Um, so yeah, I mean, it seems like it's a healthy competition between the three of them, and that's really all you could ask for after, you know, what happened last year. Um, so yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on that.
Yeah, and a couple just reactions to what you were talking about too. I was pretty surprised when Peyton was as open as he was about the
Hmm.
injury issues that he had last year. Like he didn't get into specifics, but he said a torn something.
Yeah.
He
He
gave
he did
lower
say, yeah, he said upper body, lower body for
body, lower
multiple
body,
different weeks.
right?
So
Talked about how it compounded as the season went on, and you could kind of I there was maybe it was just me, but I picked up on a little bit of a tension, like when as he was sharing that, like there you can tell that it kind of if I'm reading it right, it seems like it's grinding him a little bit, the fact that he's having to defend himself, and I don't mean that in a negative way at all. Actually, I like it a lot that it kind of rubs him the wrong way that he's maybe in, and this is my speculation. He didn't say this directly, but my sense was that there's a bit of an edge there, and I think that's a good thing. Like anytime you've got a starter coming back who has something to prove, and has kind of shown in the past, like 2021 had a pretty darn good year. So he's shown in the past that he can be a good quarterback, and now he has a reason to be motivated this offseason and throughout the offseason to kind of prove that again. I think it's a good thing. And that's not to say that he is going to win the job. I think he is the leader in the clubhouse right now. Um, but I just think that uh, my stance throughout last year too was that yes, he needs to be better, but there are other things that are going on here that are contributing to him uh, taking a step back
right,
from 2021.
right.
And the way he talked about the injuries and things like that, it kind of just reinforced that a little bit. And again, I'm not making excuses for the guy. I don't have a horse in the race. I'm not related to any of the three quarterbacks. Like
Mm,
I whoever's the best guy in on September 1st or 2nd or whenever they play Central Michigan, that guy should be on the field. I don't care who it is.
mhm,
Um, but I kind of I liked the vibe I got from Peyton just in that post game interview. As far as on the field, I think Peyton was pretty much the most even keel of all of them. Like he didn't have any like wow throws or wow plays, but he didn't have that like ooh ugly throw or attempt that almost gets picked off. He didn't have one of those either. And as far as the
mhm.
his health and things like that, I think that showed a little bit on that scramble that he had in the 2 minute when he scampered ahead for 15 yards and scored. Now, obviously,
Yeah.
when you can't touch the quarterback, it's tough to evaluate would he have gotten in the end zone or not. Who knows? But he did show that mobility that was kind of missing last year on that
Mhm,
particular play. So that's worth noting. As far as Hauser, he did say afterwards that he feels more comfortable. He feels like he's at his best when it's more of a live game situation, and he's out there playing as opposed to drill work, which I mean, who knows? That could be just. I'm not going to pretend to know what's going on in his head, but like I can kind of buy that just based on his reputation or the profile that he brought with him to Michigan
mhm,
State about being a bit of a gunslinger and things like that. And um, so, yeah, I kind of agree with the established or what the established media has said in the post spring game about Peyton 1, Kim 2, Hauser 3. I generally agree based on what we saw in one practice. That's important context.
right, right.
Um, but I'm not worried about Hauser. I don't think I'm not going the other direction where it's like he was overhyped and then he's and things like that. I'm not there yet either.
No.
We didn't get to see enough. I mean, I would have loved to see him in a 2-minute setting too. That we got to see Kim and Thorne. Um, but either they ran out of time or it wasn't part of the practice regimen or schedule. So yeah, I obviously everybody wants to talk about the quarterbacks, and I totally get that. But I would caution people not to put too much stock into what we saw on Saturday. There's another question here from Kyle. Is Peyton Thorne healthy? Is playing injured a mistake on the part of coaching? That's a good question too. Based on what he said after Saturday, um, it sounds like he's back to full health. He said he was feeling much better than he did last year. It kind of sounded like he took a little something into the season with him, and then against Western Michigan, it got re-aggravated or maybe hurt worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say he's in a better place physically now than he was maybe even at this time last year. Um, and as far as playing injured, a mistake, that's a really interesting question. Um, because a lot of people, when Peyton shared how much he was dealing with last year, I saw a lot of reaction on social media about if he was hurt, why was he out there? Why didn't they throw Kim in there? There's a lot of different answers to that we're not privy to because we're not in the coaches meeting. Um, but I guess logically, the answer that makes sense is that even Peyton at whatever percentage he was last year, I'm not going to pretend to know what that was. They felt more comfortable with him out there than wherever Kim was in the system with what he was showing in practice. We could debate all the live long day about who should have played last year if Peyton was this hurt, but ultimately, I mean, the season's been over for 6-7 months, probably longer than that. I don't know,
Yeah, since
about
November.
five.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
since
5 months.
November's 5 months. So hard to say. But again, based on what we saw Saturday and some of the 2-minute stuff that are late drives that we saw from Kim last year. Um, if let's hypothetically, if Thorne's the starter and gets beat up again, I think they might be quicker to go to Kim this year, um, based on again how last year played out, what we saw in limited reps last year from Kim in late game situations, and just some of the throws he's capable of making. So it's a good question. Any other thoughts on the quarterback? I think we covered it pretty thoroughly.
Yeah, I mean, again, I know. I mean, Kirby Smart talked about it like with Georgia about, they're only 25% through like the evaluation process after spring. So I guess
Right.
just like think about that. I mean, every single guy is, you know, there's gonna be one day where Thorne is gonna, be clear of the other two, and then there's gonna be another day where Hauser's gonna be better than the other two, and then
Right.
Kim's gonna be better than the other two. So I mean, it's just a day by day basis, and whoever stacks up the most days where they're the best will, it seems to be, um that'll be who the starter will. Yeah, that's who
Yeah.
the starter is gonna be. So yeah.
Right. Um, Kind of moving on. We're going to get into some new portal entry stuff for Michigan State. We're not going to spend a ton of time here because I do want to get to a little bit of basketball stuff before we get out of here, and we're going to have to cut the show short a little bit today. Um, but Hamp Fay entered the portal on, let's see, today's Wednesday, so that was Tuesday. Um, not a huge surprise. I remember you and I went to a practice, like the first 15 minutes of a practice last year, and Hamp Fay was working on, I think, with the safeties or at least the
Mhm.
secondary. And I don't remember if I said it to you or if I just said it to myself, but I was like, he just kind of looked a little out of place there. He's 6'5", 240. It's a big guy for a safety. Tight end, I think, made more sense for Hamp Fay. If he could have maybe grown into that or bulked up a little bit more. But
Mhm.
just a guy who just didn't have many avenues of getting onto the field. Um, Tried three different positions at Michigan State. I think he had a shoulder thing or some kind of injury while he was a quarterback too that can maybe accelerated him moving to a different position. Um, and when I say this, I don't mean it to disparage him in any way, but just not a huge loss for Michigan State, a guy who was buried on the depth chart at multiple positions. Any thoughts on Hampfey?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, he was a 6'5", like 210 plus guy. I mean, we said that on Saturday about Harold Joyner as well. He
Yeah,
moved to defensive backs, at least for spring, and he's about 6'4", probably 220. So that was a little interesting, seeing him at safety. But yeah, um, he's another guy from the 2021 class that is entering the transfer portal. So, that class is getting slimmer and slimmer, but that's kind of
right.
just the new age of college football. And yeah, I mean, I wish him the best, but yeah, it definitely was not going to be easy for him to get on the field with, Thorne coming back another year, Kim and Hauser, what we've already talked about, and then just, um, that tight end room, whether it's good or not, there's a lot of them.
A lot of bodies.
There's a lot of bodies in that tight end room. So just transitioning to tight end was not going to be easy. And that immediately, the second you transition, you're at the bottom of the depth chart already. So that just makes it even harder for
Right.
him. So, but I'll be interested. I'll just say this. I'll end with this. I'll be interested to see not only where he goes, but what position he plays wherever he goes.
Right, and that transition to tight end, we've seen that. I know Michigan had a couple guys, or at least one guy, Gentry. I
Hmm.
can't remember his first name, but he
Yeah.
transitioned from quarterback to tight end. Um, and like as far as Michigan State guys, we've seen Tyler Hunt go from a specialist, a punter, to tight end. But I know Tyler personally. He and I went to the same high school,
Mm.
um, and he was always a super athlete. And his brother is practically a bodybuilder, like a big guy, and so Tyler got in the weight room and added quite a bit of muscle mass and things like that in order to be able to play tight end. And even with that, it still took him a couple of years to develop into. I remember like when he first made the transition, he didn't play a whole lot, and last 2 years, kind of out of necessity, he did play quite a bit.
Mhm.
I think like during the 11-2 season, they rotated guys, but he had some highlight plays. I think he was arguably, when you look at Daniel Barker and Malik Carr from last year, they're more receiving type tight ends, and so I would argue that Tyler was the best blocking tight end of the group last year. Um, but it's just my point is it's a tough transition. Um, and then one other guy who I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but Itavian Brown did enter the transfer portal after being dismissed from the team. Um, he was charged with a felony gun possession, um, and was removed from the team. I want to add a little bit of context to kind of what went on there, and then we'll be done with it. But obviously, Brown was one of the 7 players who was suspended after the Michigan tunnel thing. Um, and so kind of had a mark on his resume from that. And then based on what we heard from the MSU spokesperson when it was announced that he was dismissed from the team, he had been suspended from February, which would have been a second suspension because after the season ended, and I think the Big Ten came out with its rulings on what happened with the tunnel thing. And everybody, I think, except for Kerry Crump, was reinstated to the team at that time. And so if Itavian Brown was suspended in February, that means that was a second suspension, and we don't know what that was for or about. Um, and then this incident of with the gun charges that occurred, I want to say mid March, March 17th or something like that. And so he
Mhm.
wasn't participating. Michigan State started spring practice on the 15th of March. He was not
Mhm.
practicing with the team because he was already suspended going back to February. And then on March 17th, I believe, is when he got hit with, or at least um, arrested due to the gun charges, or what eventually became the gun charges. And so that was kind of, in my opinion, like it's a pretty simple 3 strikes: tunnel thing, suspended in February, comes up on gun charges. Obviously, what happened at Michigan State this winter with the shooting, I'm sure all of this played into the decision to dismiss him from the team. Um, and so I applaud Mel and the coaching staff for not having, for not hesitating, I guess, to dismiss him from the team based on just the context of everything that went on there. And I think maybe arguably the biggest piece of that was the tragedy that happened on campus. Like I don't know. Again, I'm spending more time on this than I said I was going to, but like it just a lack of judgment based on just what had happened at the university a couple months earlier. So he's got to deal with his legal stuff before he thinks about playing football again. But hopefully this will be a bit of a wake up call, maybe.
Yeah.
And again, I don't have any ill will against the guy at all. I don't know the guy, but hopefully something he can learn from and go forward. Do you have any thoughts you wanted to share?
No, not really.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move on to basketball then, and this is where we'll kind of wrap up tonight's show.
I
Oh,
will
actually,
just answer.
yeah,
Yeah,
we
I
got a
was gonna
question here.
say there
Go ahead.
is Jonathan Kim is a place kicker from North Carolina. He is coming in the summer. So it will be him and Steven Rusnick, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. So it'll be the two of them. So
Right.
yeah, there's that.
Unless they add a third option,
hmm
which
I
maybe, but
will
like,
say they are looking into the portal for more players. I know uh Mel said that after the game Saturday, evaluating. They did have Nebraska wide receiver Alante Brown on campus today.
yep.
Um, I I don't know if that's finalized or not. Obviously, you if you could add to the wide receiver room a little bit more depth, that would definitely be nice. But yeah, nothing final there, and
And
with
with Brown, I
just the
think he
one player.
was he was a one-time Michigan State commit. Am I right in that? I
I
I, I
I
had
don't
heard that.
remember.
I don't
Yeah,
know
it
what
might have
class he
been.
was a part of. I didn't look
I
into it
can't
that
remember.
closely, but
Mhm.
based on what I saw on MSU Twitter, he kind of sounded like he was a fan favorite during the recruiting process and was a one-time commit. So obviously there's already a relationship there between
Mhm.
him and the coaching staff, so he's definitely a name to watch. Um, so yeah, that's kind of where we're at with the transfer portal right now. Just want to get into a little bit of basketball before we wrap tonight's show. Um, the biggest like Big Ten news this week was Zach Edey submitting his name to the NBA draft while maintaining his college eligibility. Obviously, Purdue won the Big Ten last year. They were kind of the cream of the crop. Won the conference by 3 games. Nobody else was really like it was Purdue and then a gap and then everybody else. It seemed like this year, but obviously Zach Edey was the main part of that. A guy who won, I think, multiple National Player of the Year awards, or at least was in the discussion.
Mhm.
Double double machine, mismatch nightmare for just about everybody, especially though for Michigan State. Michigan State had two. They couldn't stop him in either one of the matchups that they had against Purdue this year. So I'll just kind of pose the question to you, Aiden. Um, if Zach Edey stays in the NBA draft, is Michigan State the favorite to win the Big Ten next year?
Yeah. And I kind of have a little bit of a hot take here, but I
Okay.
think even if he comes back, I think MSU will still be the favorite.
All right. That's where I was going to go
And
next. So I'm
that's
glad.
yeah. So I mean, I mean, obviously, like there's gonna be comparisons to Hunter Dickinson because he's another guy who tested the waters and then ended up coming back. when he could have potentially cashed out his freshman year, and now really there's no market for him. I kind of see the same thing with Edie. Like I don't really see a market in the NBA for a guy who's 7'4" and just really slow. Um,
Yeah,
and just I mean that's his biggest flaw. He can score. He's a decent defender just based off his size. But yeah, I mean that the pace that he plays with is definitely gonna hold him back. Wherever he plays professionally.
right,
Um, so I think that's going to be a struggle, but I think just with the depth of MSU's guards, with Tyson Walker coming back, adding Fears, Cohen Carr coming in with for the forwards, along with Malik Hall staying. I just think that the amount of depth that they have is
right.
more than anyone in the league. And I think for that reason, MSU should be the favorite to win, regardless of Edie. And just we saw in March, kind of produce flaws,
Right,
in that Fairleigh Dickinson game.
right.
So, and that's guards. So those what's his name, Braden Miller, or
Yep, yep.
yeah, him and
I think it's
Fletcher
Braden.
Lawyer. Yeah,
Yeah,
Miller and Lawyer. They're gonna be sophomores, but they can't you know immediately gain a ton of experience that someone like Tyson Walker has,
right.
overnight. So yeah, for that reason, I think MSU should still be the favorites.
Yeah, I think you can expect Purdue's guards to take a step after, from freshman to sophomore year.
Mhm.
But I mean, you touched on it with AJ Hogard, Jaden Akins, Tyson Walker. I'm like, that's arguably, as far as a guard trio, I think that stacks up with just about anybody nationally, much less the Big Ten.
Mhm.
As far as just having three really solid guys who you can put on the floor at any time and in most situations, offensively and defensively, and you're going to be in a good shape. Um, the intrigue there is what happens with the younger guys, Holloman and Fears. And I think you talked about depth. Um, Depth was such a concern, especially early on this season when Jaden was down or nicked up, and Hall was nursing his the stress fracture in his foot, and man, depth was really limited. You only had 10 scholarship guys. You had two true freshman centers who were getting their first taste of college basketball. Um, so it was a huge concern. Just the difference a year can make. And when you
Right.
sign the number three recruiting class in the country, that obviously is a big part of that. But yeah, they're in good shape. Um, that's interesting. I was going to pose the question to you, even if Edie comes back, are they the favorite? Um,
Mhm.
you make a compelling argument. Like guard play in modern basketball is where a lot of games are won and lost, and you can make up for a mismatch in the post. The thing about Edie, you mentioned it a little bit. Outside of free throws, which he was a decent free throw shooter. Seems like he shot in the mid 70s, I think.
Mhm.
But as far as like game action, I can't remember the guy shooting the ball outside of 6 feet. Like
No.
I don't I can't remember one, and I
He
don't
he
you know
reminds you he reminds you of kind of like a Ethan Happ kind of guy who
yeah,
he didn't really shoot much outside of, the paint at all.
right. And Hap it was like the footwork. He had really good footwork in the post, and then for
Mhm.
Edie, it's just what are you gonna do? He's 7'4" and got
Right.
wide shoulders, and if you are buying him, you're probably gonna get clocked in the head by an elbow or something. So it's just
Mhm.
a tough matchup down low. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't know how his game translates uh to the next level. Even as a rim protector, it's hard to imagine.
Mhm.
So I do expect him to come back for his senior year. Um, and I do think it'll be Michigan State and Purdue at the top.
Mhm.
Um, and I haven't looked at next year's schedule, or it's probably not. It's not even out yet, I don't think. But
No.
hopefully, because sometimes in the Big Ten you get those situations where you only get one matchup with a conference
Right,
opponent. It's at
right.
somebody's home in a way. Hopefully, there are two games between Michigan State and Purdue next year. I would just prefer that. Um, so and it could be to the best games in the Big Ten next year. Um, let's see, what time is it? 7:15. Yeah. So any closing thoughts, I guess, with basketball? ESPN did update their way too early rankings now that a few of these college guys have made their decisions. Duke's up to number one after their leading scorer. I can't remember his name,
Yeah, Kyle
Filipowski or something.
Filipowski.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Filipowski. He's back, and so Duke's at number one. Shocker. And then Michigan State moved up from number six to number three in ESPN's rankings, and that was due to Walker and Hall both coming back. And so, like, there's no shying away from the expectations from next year. Uh, and after this last season, making the Sweet 16, getting out of that first weekend, I think was such a big thing for Michigan State this year.
mhm,
Just to because they have some momentum on the recruiting trail, but like just from a national perspective, though, of remaining in that fold, and not that it's based on 1 year or anything like that, but just when you haven't been to the second weekend in a number of years, you can kind of be forgotten about a little bit. And so to upset Marquette and to play arguably the game of the tournament, but against Kansas State,
right.
um, like it just that national spotlight being on the program again is a good thing. I think you're already seeing that in recruiting this year with Kurt Tang committing. Jesse McCulloch is going to announce his decision tomorrow. That's a four-star center out of Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah, Ohio. Yep.
Yep, and it's down to Michigan State, Xavier, Alabama, and Virginia Tech. Michigan State's leading the crystal balls for him. So the program could be getting more news or more good news tomorrow. So just a lot of good positive momentum for the program right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, just closing out on kind of the expectations, you know, that team, this MSU team, Purdue, that I mean, they ran through the Big Ten, they're
Right.
definitely made for the Big Ten, but MSU seems to be built for, a tournament, and just nationally, to
Yeah.
contend with other teams, and just the different styles of play that they can uh, play, makes them a little bit more versatile than Purdue. But yeah, for recruiting, obviously Kurt Tang, you got McCullough coming up, committing tomorrow. I think it was 4:30,
Yep.
to be exact. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of momentum around the program. Obviously you got that freshman class. I think that's really going to be the biggest thing is who can make the biggest impacts and how much of an impact can they make next year, especially, you know, Booker. I think that's the biggest one. Just how
Right.
much of an impact can he make? Like what does he bring? Can he play at the four while Sissoko plays at the five, or Carson Cooper plays at the five. In a small ball lineup, obviously, I'd like to think that he'd be playing the five, and that I mean, a lot of people who've been following recruiting are really high on Cohen Carr and think he will make the biggest impact of all the
Hmm.
freshmen coming in.
Yep.
Um, you know, Even Garrick Norman, someone like him who can play a three spot, potentially a four spot in a small ball lineup. Like, does he get some playing time over some other guys? Maybe does he get playing time over Malik Hall? Like, or does he get playing time over, is he taking Trey Holloman or Hogard's minutes depending on the matchup? I think that's definitely some questions worth posing, especially since we're in April and we have
Yeah.
lots of time to pose questions. So think that's kind of where I'm at right now for, the expectations for next year for basketball.
Yeah. I know most people are excited about summer, especially those who are in college or high school, and you can speak to that, Aiden, as far as finals coming up this week or and things like that. But since I've been out of college and maybe even going back into my last couple years of college, I've always been of the opinion, let's just skip summer and get to football season, because I'm always ready for the new season, more content, more things to talk about, and more relevant conversation that you can tangible conversation is probably a better word than relevant.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's kind of that time of year where we'll take a little bit more time to rest up and kind of gear up for the next year. Um, but before we know it, Big Ten Media Days will be happening in July. So, but thanks for tuning in, everybody. That's what we're going to call it right here, and we appreciate you guys coming out and following us.